This is an exceptionally sensitive topic, so please understand that I'm not making this video to attack, criticize, or condemn your parents for what they did or did not do. Teenagers crave revenge, but the conscious adult understands that parental influence and parental manipulation are a spectrum of differentiated and often very subtle degrees of progression. Trauma can unfortunately cloud our judgment, but the very baseline truth is that the wounded parent raises the wounded child, and this video is my best attempt to try and separate out that full woundedness kind of lion from harmless, low-level deceit and white lies about the Easter Bunny. It's Easter Sunday today when I'm filming this, so I suppose that's why I mentioned the Easter Bunny. So those kind of harmless white lies, all the way to straight up tyrannical evil. Most people watching this video are going to be across the threshold in at least one form or another in regards to their parental relationships, but I hope that the three-stage process I'm going to bring forwards in a moment will help you to break free from parental manipulation and also have that healthy adult understanding that you can't establish your peace of mind on a foundation of vengeance. I want to make that abundantly clear at the very beginning of this video. You cannot establish your peace of mind on a foundation of vengeance. It simply won't work. I've seen this dozens of times in one-to-one mentorships where people have renegotiated their parental relationships in regards to memories from the past and the relationship in the present, and vengeance never works. The reason that I'm making today's video, in addition to bringing through this three-stage process, is a response to this question on the Inner Work Library question series from Rani. Bit of a different angle from that introduction, but you'll see why this video emerges from this question. Bring it up on the screen. Would it be possible for you to talk about what impact does a parent treating their child as a friend have on the child's mental growth and view of the world? Not like, Timmy, we can't buy the thing you want because we are short on money, but more like, Timmy, my boss is an a-hole and I hate my job, but I have to feed us somehow. That question is so open, and I love how insightful it can be towards that very subtle conversation around manipulation, because the initial title for this video was going to be a word that I realized I can't use on YouTube. It's a topic of emotional, we're going to spell it out, emotional, I-N-C-E-S-T. It's a psychologically correct term. I can't even say it out. YouTube's trying to censor me in my throat. That word right there is a psychologically correct term that comes up in the literature for what happens when a parent gives an inappropriate level of emotional demand or emotional closeness to a child who is really not meant to be having these kinds of conversations. There's a difference between a parent being honest, i.e., we haven't got the money to afford this right now, to then a parallel example of, we haven't got the money because my boss is an absolute piece of excrement and your father wastes it all on gambling and therefore we're not going to eat. And did I mention as well just how much of a piece of excrement your father is, and also your uncle as well? He's dreadful. It goes into that category. That's one of the forms of emotional codependence that we can get locked up in. And the reason that example is a great framing for this question is because the three-stage process of understanding, followed by internal reconciliation, and then the optional third stage of external reconciliation can be framed through this particular example. One child may be very resilient and they might have conversations like this forced upon them on a weekly basis by their mother or their father, where the parent is seeking some kind of emotional support from the child because they're not getting it from the healthy relational spouse conversation that they should be having as man and woman in the relationship. They're doing it with the child instead. One child is going to be very much still absorbed in their Legos or doing the jigsaw puzzle or heading out the door on their bike, and they're going to be like, yeah, mom, off I go. Completely like water over a duck's head. Not a duck's back, a duck's head. The duck goes underwater, comes out the other side, and then flaps away off into the lake. The duck is not affected, and you are the duck in this example. And if you can tell, I'm using silly metaphors because this is a very emotionally heavy topic. Hopefully it lightens the conversation before we get into the real dark, heavy stuff. We are getting there. One child may find that to be so emotionally ineffective that they just don't get affected really at all. Another child who is empathically attuned and kind of the more sensitive, caring child, or maybe they're frightened in the environment because arguments happen and violence happens either towards one parent or towards themselves, they're going to be shifted all the way to the extreme end of parental control. They're caught in the crossfire between mom or dad complaining about the other partner getting angry, and all kinds of drama and violence and abuse being the daily texture for about 2 decades of existence. It's why I can't make a video which has a general suggestion for how to break free from parental control. This is the stage 1 process of understanding. For you to understand your particular story, to understand who your mother was and who she wasn't, who she could have been and who she unfortunately was, and the same for your father and your extended family being added on, the aunties, the uncles, the particularly close neighbors, the grandparents and the significant teachers. We extend the story outwards in every direction and try and get multiple levels of depth within each character in our story. That's beginning the process of understanding. Because if you don't properly engage in this process of understanding, where does the trauma lie in really become actual trauma, and where was it just a bit of a misguided parent who was doing their best, you will be caught up for way too long on that more adolescent initial stage of vengeance and anger and rebellion. It's not to say that that's bad. In cases of extreme abuse, especially physical or sexual abuse, it's really appropriate to be incredibly angry for often a long period of time. But if we're looking at the full length of a human life, I'd hope that that anger has resolved in your heart after 50 years or 60 years. I hope that you don't die with that anger still inside of you, because that poisoned you along the journey. Yes, it's tragic, and I don't support it. I'm not saying that we should prematurely forgive a parent who acts out in such a horrific and evil way, but from the fully detached perspective, we can see that something happened to them to make them as wounded as they are, that they created that wounded space and that wounded environment which has led to your current situation. I'm not going to reconcile it for you in this video. It is a very long process to get towards that point of genuine forgiveness and genuine releasing, but this takes us into the second stage of breaking free from the parental influence or the parental manipulation. If you understand your story, which means to go back in time, look at the particular memories, look at the types of conversations, look at the very overt and the very covert, the explicit and implicit forms of manipulation that you were wrapped up in as a child. If you can do that work, you already cross the boundary into stage 2, which is internal reconciliation. We resolve our trauma privately, either through our own therapeutic practices, or with a helping professional one-to-one space, or with a variety of cathartic processes, which I've covered in this channel so many times. You can check those videos out if you're interested. We start to reconcile our trauma in a way which doesn't create a demand on a living parent to change their behavior. This is something which I see repeatedly as the initial common sense motivation for people that I'm working with as they're starting to remove themselves from parental patterns. Often there'll be a man or a woman who's still either living with their parents, even in their 30s sometimes, maybe they're between jobs and they're living with their parent as they're moving places, or maybe they're in their 20s and they still haven't, they've returned from university or something and they're in that environment for a while, or they're in close proximity where either the parent comes round every day or several times a week, and of course, because we have the internet now, they pick up the phone or they send the text, and it's a constant contact, even if they're halfway across the world. Psychologically, it's still very similar. Of course, it's more intense to be in your mom or dad's home, but it's still quite psychologically intense to have the constant ringing on the iPhone or the Android and feel like you're still under their watchful gaze. It's difficult to not want to try and change the situation immediately. For some people that I've worked with, they've needed to physically remove themselves. They've needed no contact for a period of time. They've needed to move state. They've needed to move country. They've needed to go genuinely halfway across the world and not respond to the calls or texts because of the particular type of trauma that they had. For one person watching this video, they may think that that's one of the most evil things that you could do to your parent. You might think that that's so unfair. How could you cut off a parent? How could you create a distance where you don't speak to them, potentially for years or decades? For some people, that's the right healing choice if they've gone through a certain type of experience. For many people, that will be too extreme, and it's a case of just wanting some restrictions, maybe going from calling every day to having the conversation later on of, I want to call once a week, or actually I want a month off and please don't contact me. But that's still skipping forwards. Even if you know what the outcome that you would like is, i.e., I actually only want to see my mom once a month and not 4 times a week because I'm a 39-year-old woman and I shouldn't be this close to my mom. I have a family, I have a career, or I'm a 22-year-old man. I don't need to be having these constant conversations with my mom about what she bought from the supermarket this week. That's the stage that comes next, but the real healing moment is you pausing to really psychologically understand what it would mean to leave your parents' home. This is the initiation principle in the unconscious mind, which carries the major healing breakthrough, the major threshold crossing of breaking free from your parents. It's properly completing the growth arc from child to adolescent to adult. Some would say that you're not truly an adult until you've left your mother's home. It's a very Jungian idea, but it's also psychologically proven across over 100 years of literature that there are mental disorders and mental unease, which is related from being too enmeshed to either your mother or your father. Men often are in this fighting match psychologically, unconsciously with their same-sex parent, and women often do the same. For men, it's usually a little bit more intense. They want to beat their father. There's that testosterone element of wanting to do better and I'll show you and who do you think you are, and that's a very normal, manly thing. For women, it's often more covert and implicit, and there's little comments about weight or little comments about how your relationships are going and all these tests and little elements, and that's kind of moving into the middle ground of manipulation. If you understand what's happening and you internally reconcile the psychological projections that are coming your way, so for example, with the weight issue, if you can pause after those interactions where your mom gets on the phone to you and makes a comment on the Facebook photo and it's like, well, I see that you, how much have you been going to the gym lately? And you get furious. You're like, who are you? This is my body. Like, what are you talking about? Like, go away. I'm not a child. I'm whatever age you might be. You can pause with that trigger and you can reconcile that progressively, incrementally, to the point where you have the same phone call and once more your mother says, hey, I see that, when did you go to the gym again? Like, I haven't been in actually a week. I've been focusing on so-and-so. It's very relaxed. No trigger, no response. That's one example. If you can be the young man, another example, who goes back to, let's say, the Christmas dinner, really classic situation. Go back to the family home for Christmas, you've got a good distance from your family, you've got maybe a few months has been by, you have some messages here and there, normal kind of adult to adult relating, but you go back to your father's table and you're sat there at the dinner table and there he is at the head of the table, man of the house in his 50s, his 60s, his 70s, whatever it might be, and he confronts you and he says, son, I haven't heard too much about your business lately. And you're like, oh yeah, you talk about it. And then he says, well, but what about he asks the specific questions and you rise to the challenge and you give the specific information and he asks another question and it gets more and more and more and more subtle. But what's really happening is this. You're having a shadow boxing match and he's trying to test you out and you're just like slipping and then he's doing this. That's all that's happening in all of that conversation and you know it. If you can internally reconcile beforehand based on an understanding of the patterns that will be likely to come up in these family environments. You're going to be asked that question, and you may say the exact same words of, yes, the business is doing this, and I'm moving here, and this is my challenge. But you'll show up as a man who isn't emotionally thrown off center by your father's accusation, judgment, or condemnation, or that subtle challenge to be better. It's an important role for a father to carry that. That's a form of masculine love. The masculine love does have a conditional element. I'm not saying that there won't be unconditional elements of healthy love towards a child, but there's a certain trait about masculine love which is challenging. The masculine principle of, here's a boundary and here's a target and let's move somewhere. Most men and most fathers will always have some of that energy, but you can remove the trauma dynamic with consciousness. At that point, if you're the woman who can heal the relationship with your mom and you don't get triggered by the comments about weight or about relationships or about how your career's going, and if you're the man who cannot rise to the psychological challenge of the father, of course, you can also be the woman and your relationships to your father, or the man and your relationships to your mother. I'm making a general video. This is hours upon hours of conversation about specific patterns. The principle of stage 2 is to heal your heart and heal your trauma to as much a degree as you can in private before expecting that anything could possibly change externally. You will not be able to go into those conversations with your parents while being in the triggered state and expecting anything other than feeling like you're a teenager again, back in your childhood bedroom, and it's like, I've just lost 20 years of maturity, where did that go? That's the classic pattern of going back at Christmas and feeling like you're 14 again. It's because the trauma hasn't been quite resolved. Stage 3, again, let's summarize. Stage 1, understanding. Full 360 view of your childhood and the patterns and the principles, and yeah, we got that. Stage 2, internal reconciliation. The trauma work and the reflective, contemplative, what can I heal that's in my power? What can I take responsibility for? Where can I heal the burning wounds? Stage 3 is an optional stage. For some people who want to maintain a permanent distance from their parents or a temporary extended distance for a few months, that's the healing in stage 3. That's the external reconciliation with your mom or your dad. You don't have to do this. I've seen different stories play out with different people that I've worked with certain, I'm trying to keep people anonymous, so I'm going to kind of mix it up a little bit. If it gets mixy, it's because I'm trying to obviously protect people's stories because confidentiality. I see certain patterns play out where someone will remove themselves for about 3 months. They'll remove themselves for about 3 months from the dynamic, and the parent will come in and they'll challenge the boundary. And they'll keep challenging it, they'll try and stir it up, and progressively they'll get the message. And then there's a reconciliation, and they go back to having a wonderful adult-to-adult relationship. I've seen other stories where the same exact boundary is put up, no contact, and the parent will completely disappear. And I imagine that that's going to be a 5-year story of no one talking to each other. There's other stories where there's a direct confrontation after a bit of trauma work. There's a direct confrontation and it gets way worse. Other stories where there's direct confrontation and the consciousness of the parent has shifted in some way, and you can have a truly healthy, wonderful adult-to-adult relationship. I can't predict the outcome for you. The outcome's uncertain. What's in your control is the internal healing work, and to truly be able to move to the point where you can have a healthy adult-to-adult relationship, you have to be willing to accept that they may never change. I really mean that. They may never change. They might always be a drug addict. They might always be a rageaholic. They might always be emotionally manipulative. They might always be emotionally insensitive. They might always be far too inappropriate in regards to their intrusion into your private life. That could just be the parent that you have. What do you do with the information? That's up to you. I've obviously got my own story. If you've watched enough videos on this channel, you'll see that I bring up pieces of my story here and there, but I don't explicitly name the situations, at least at this stage in this channel, because I feel like it takes away from the principles that I'm trying to teach in these videos. I don't want it to be about me and my particular story, because I know that as you gain influence on any kind of digital platform, the easy thing to do is to see someone that maybe you have respect for who I've become, and you might be tempted to then take the patterns that I've enacted and try and fit them onto your own life and your own particular situation. Or maybe you'll do it for someone else, or a book that you read, you'll see what worked for them, and then you'll try it out for yourself. It's unlikely and almost certainly not going to work the same way for you as it worked for them, which is why I don't talk about too much of my personal journey with trauma healing or parental reconciliation, because I know how sticky that territory can be a little bit further down the line. I'll often never hear about it. I'm likely to have dozens of people might try things out, and I won't ever get a comment to know if it worked or didn't work. So you got to be very careful. Don't try and inherit someone else's conflict resolution strategy. You can resolve as much conflict as you can inside yourself, and your parent will be your parent. You don't have to heal the relationship. Ideally, the relationship itself in the physical, you as the person that you are, and them as the person that they are, that would be wonderful if you can get along. But for many people that I work with, it will be an uneasy relationship for the rest of their life, especially if the trauma was very difficult. For some people that I've worked with, it's actually easier when the parent has already died. They can do that internal reconciliation work without the psychological pressure that their parent is looming over them. You see this really classically in certain case studies from psychological literature, where the man in his midlife, when his father dies, will suddenly get that opening where he can really be honest about his emotions, because he knows that his father isn't going to metaphorically walk into the room while he's crying, even though it's a memory from when he was 7 years old, and hit him for being weak. It lingers until he's 40 or 45 or 50. Those kinds of patterns are pretty typical. If you're in a situation like that right now, then know that that's somewhat of a normal situation. We need a liberation from the all-seeing eye of parental vigilance, but it's also an peeling back of the trauma. We're getting a little bit muddy, I suppose, in terms of where we can go about specifics, because I can't talk to your specifics. Once more, I do not want you to condemn. I do not want you to go overly victimized. I don't want you to get a flag and wave it high in the sky to gather sympathy for how difficult your childhood was or how cruel they were. It doesn't go towards the outcome that you want. It's wasting energy. There's truth that needs to be acknowledged. There's pain that is requiring healing, but don't expect that your parent will respond to the intensity of the emotion that you feel within. And you ultimately, final point of the video, you can be healed without them apologizing. If you're implicitly, subconsciously seeking the apology and you're wanting mommy or daddy to say, I'm sorry that I hurt you, that's very normal. And I've been through that stage myself. But it might not happen, and your healing journey shouldn't be predicated upon the certainty of that happening in the future, because the power is out of your hands at that point. See what else you can do. Work tangentially, flank around the issue, and you may find that a few years into the future, because of you changing the way that you operate in the world and minimizing those psychological thought-form etheric threads with your parents, that they actually change, and out of the blue one day you get a message and there is an apology. Or maybe not. Maybe it never happens. That's the truth of the healing journey. You just don't know. But what is within your control is to see what you can do for yourself and do with professionals and do with the books I recommend on this channel. I hope this video helps. If you enjoyed this topic and you want to very much continue these final 5 minutes of ambiguous how can you help people who don't want to be helped, that is exactly the topic of the next video. We're talking about why you should stop trying to help people who clearly don't want to be helped. I'll see you over there.